Mr. Nooruddin, the question I want to ask you is, one might say, it's a terrible thing that has gone down, but this is the alternate reality for 47% of Trump's voters who actually feel that this election was stolen from them.
Yeah, that's very clear. And one of the really depressing parts of this situation is how many people have enabled Trump to get away with what he has and to pull off what he did yesterday. The fault is widespread. There are many people to blame. And I'm going to start actually with the 8 senators and 131 congressmen who voted last night, even in the aftermath of all of this, to sustain objections to the election. It is an embarrassing footnote in history that they will all be. I do think that we shouldn't read too much into some of the poll numbers. A lot of people are deeply unhappy. They've been fed through social media and through sort of a siloed media, a very particular narrative. That will dissipate. And what we saw last night, if there is any hope to take away from last night, it is a very clear breaking of Senator Mitch McConnell, of Vice President Pence, from the Trump line. And these are respected figures. It's going to be very hard for a large part of the mainstream conservative media to dismiss what happened yesterday, and already you can see that beginning to turn. But the notion that this is an incredibly polarized country where lots of people have bought into the language of a rigged, fraudulent election is a lasting stain on American democracy, and something that I'm not sure that we're going to see our way past, at least for a couple of years.
Exactly. Ms. Kriplani, I'll bring you in on this. How do you read this? Because one doesn't really need to be in America or Washington to see that Biden's going to inherit a deeply polarized country for America and Americans.
Yes, well, that is true. However, I'm not as worried about American democracy or the state of democracy as others are. I think democracy is extremely flexible. It has the capacity to bend one way or the other, and democracy is not going to break. So this is an extreme end of democracy, and yet it stretches, and it will bounce back to the middle at some point. To lay blame, I think, is really on both sides. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So to lay blame is really it's on both sides, and I think the demonization has been going on both sides, on the Democratic side and on the Republican side, and it all began with Hillary Clinton calling the people that did not vote for her as deplorables.
Is, when we talk about the demonization of both sides, and I know Mr. Nooruddin is shaking his head, if this was the Black, Lives protest, it would have been dealt with very, very differently. Mr. Nooruddin, would you agree? It's demonization of both sides equally?
Yeah, this is, with much respect to Manjeet, who I consider, a friend and colleague, I couldn't disagree more. This sort of both sides are at fault is unhelpful for the analysis. What has happened over the last 4 years under Trump is something that has no parallel, at least not in recent memory. A criticism and protest against Trump's xenophobic, racist, misogynistic policies is not the same as the undermining of a completely legitimate, free, transparent election over the last month. So we don't want to pretend like these are equals. It is not to suggest that anyone is perfect, but let's call a spade, and what happened yesterday was entirely the fault of President Trump and of the many, many Republican leaders who have validated and sustained his illegitimate and fraudulent claims about this election.